Most killers know their victims, and most crimes have a motive, whether it's pride, money, or even love. But then there are the outliers, those who kill for nothing more than the recklessness of the moment, or perhaps, more horrifyingly, for the thrill of taking another human life. Sometimes, the victims are simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Crime can often feel like such a large part of our lives, partly due to the fact that we take note whenever something tragic or shocking happens. And as a society, we demand to know the details, no matter how far or perhaps because of how far that situation is removed from our daily experience of the world. In this episode, we look at some of Asia's most infamous murder cases, crimes that would be any mother's nightmare. For 7 days in October 2004, Singapore police and volunteers carry out a search like no one has ever seen before.
300 local residents actually responded and came to our office. We printed about 70,000 flyers.
October 10th is the last time Huang Ying hears from her daughter, from a payphone at the Pasir Panjang Wholesale Centre. After that, 8-year-old Huang Na disappears. Huang Na's disappearance sparked one of the largest ever missing person cases in Singapore, and it even crossed over into Malaysia, where taxi drivers and shop owners joined the search. One businessman even offered up a reward of $10,000 for anyone who had information on Huang Na's whereabouts. The question is, what would motivate a complete stranger to offer up that kind of reward? The media coverage certainly helped. This was the story of a hard-working mother desperately seeking her little girl. And that's what really tugged at the heartstrings. 9 days into the investigation, police get their first promising lead.
There's this worker whom we have interviewed, revealed that on the fateful day itself, on the 10th of October at about 1:30 p.m., he actually saw Huang Na with another worker at the wholesale center.
The man is 23-year-old vegetable packer Tuk Leng Hao, a colleague and friend of Huang Na's mother.
We decided to actually invite him to come over to CID for an interview. Yeah, but throughout the interviews that we have conducted with him, he denied that he knew anything.
On the surface, Tuk Leng Hao seems like an unlikely suspect. He had a wife and a 2-year-old child. He was pretty much just a regular Joe, or someone that you could trust. Or at least Huang Ying did. Enough to leave her daughter with him when she had to run errands. But once the police release Tuk from custody, he flees to Malaysia. Alarmed, police return to the market and raid Tuk's vegetable stall, where they discover a storage room he failed to disclose. Inside, forensic scientists uncover their first clue.
On the sides of the table, even on the tabletop and the underneath surfaces, we found some prints.
And they aren't ordinary prints.
So it could be the prints of a child.
And as they strip the room, more clues manifest.
So we were examining the walls and noticed a smear, a very faint smear that was reddish brown in color.
The smear tests positive for blood. Investigators couldn't tell if the blood and the handprints belonged to Huang Na. After all, they didn't have any samples, she was just a child. That made it almost impossible to piece together what had happened in that room and to whom it had happened to. That was until the forensics team discovered something on the tape lifts that they'd taken from the storeroom.
When we examined it under the microscope, there was a large amount of denim fibers. Usually denim fibers are like cotton fibers. They are of low evidential value because they are very common. But in this particular case, there's just so many of them, and that makes it different.
And a denim jacket was the last thing Huang Na had been wearing the day she disappeared. Police recover a matching skirt from her home.
The fibers that was found on the table itself actually matches to those that were found in the skirt.
This is compelling evidence that Huang Na had been inside the storeroom, but not with whom. The handprints are also a mystery. They are tested for blood, semen and urine, but none come out positive. What other sticky substance could have left those marks? There were so many unanswered questions that the press and the public both began to speculate. That speculation soon turned into frenzy, and then things got nasty. The case brought to the surface issues about racial tension and immigration that had been simmering in Singapore for years. Reports soon emerged that Huang Na's mother had entered into Singapore illegally from China, and that her stepfather, who was also from China, had been charged with robbery. Wagging tongues also started to speculate about the relationship between Huang Shu-ying and Tuk Leng Hao, asking whether or not she could have been involved in her own daughter's disappearance. When your little girl is missing, and the public turns against you, how are you supposed to go on? Then, investigators received new, potentially crucial information about the day Huang Na disappeared.
One of the workers actually saw Tuk Leng Hao sitting in the storeroom. There's a fruit store, and there was this red plastic bag containing some mangoes.
The forensic team turned back to the hand-shaped stains they found in the storeroom.
So when we look at those stains, we were wondering, whether it could have been stains due to mango.
If investigators can prove that Tuk Leng Hao fed Huang Na the mango, they can place him with her in the storeroom on the day she disappeared. But here, the investigation comes to a standstill. Until October 30th, almost 3 weeks after Huang Na's disappearance, the case takes an unexpected turn. Tuk Leng Hao, who has been hiding in Malaysia, comes forward, not to confess a crime, but to reveal where Huang Na is. In Singapore, 8-year-old Huang Na has been missing for 3 weeks. Primary suspect Tuk Leng Hao has come forward to reveal where she is. He leads police to a park in Telok Blangah, where they learn the tragic truth.
The police found a cardboard box about 30 meters down the slope of this Telok Blangah Green. We found Huang Na's body in a fetal position and was wrapped with 9 layers of plastic bag packed inside this particular box.
The discovery of Huang Na's body sent Singaporeans into shock. How could Tuk Leng Hao, a father himself, have murdered a little girl with her whole life ahead of her? You really have to wonder what goes through the mind of someone who would kill a child. And imagine what Huang Na's mother must have felt like knowing that she had trusted the very man responsible for her child's death. At this point, it seemed obvious to the public who the killer was, but there was a big problem. The police couldn't prove that Tuk Leng Hao had murdered Huang Na. But an interesting discovery during the autopsy reveals a big clue. The plastic bags that Huang Na had been wrapped in had preserved her body remarkably well, including the last thing that she had eaten before she died: mangoes. Tests revealed the decomposed matter in Huang Na's stomach is chemically similar to the mangoes that witnesses saw Tuk Leng Hao buy that day. Investigators now believe he could have used the fruit to lure the girl into the storeroom. But it's not enough to convict him of killing her. However, a specific detail of how Huang Na's body was found sheds light into who could have disposed of her body in that manner.
The knots were tied right over left 2 times, so you have a Z twist granny knot. This knot was not special in any way. In fact, it's a knot that is commonly used. But the special thing about the manner in which it was tied was that instead of using the 2 ends of the plastic bag to form the knot, the suspect actually used the center portion of the bag to form the knots. It was not something that most people would do.
Investigators asked Tuk Leng Hao to tie a few knots. Each time, he uses the ends from the center of the bags to bind them together. It's a unique habit, ingrained over the years Tuk worked at the market.
The body was packed in such a systematic manner that not only it preserved the body, ironically, it subtly implicated the suspect, because the suspect was a vegetable packer.
Tuk Leng Hao eventually confesses to killing Huang Na, but despite evidence of sexual assault, insists that Huang Na's death had been a game of hide-and-seek gone wrong. He claims that during their game, he had tied Huang Na up in the storeroom. When he turned the lights off, he heard a thud and saw Huang Na having seizures on the floor. He says he then panicked, strangled her to death to put her out of her misery, and hid her body in a nearby park. On August 26, 2005, Tuk Leng Hao was convicted of the murder of Huang Na and sentenced to death. A little over a year later, after a final visit from his wife and 3-year-old son, he was hanged. The level of forensic analysis in this case helped solve it in a little under 3 weeks, but what science couldn't reveal was why this had happened. Some psychiatrists believed that Tuk may have had schizophrenia and that he wasn't truly accountable for his actions. Regardless, no one will ever truly know why Tuk Leng Hao decided to take the life of an 8-year-old girl that Sunday afternoon. Her family since returned to China and is trying to move on with their lives, but can closure ever truly come for a family that have to live with that ultimate betrayal of trust? The murder of a young daughter. Hong Kong has always been seen as a relatively safe place, not just for locals, but also foreigners. But that was until one particularly heinous crime in 1985 almost changed everything on the island. On April 20th, 1985, international students, 18-year-old Nicola Myers and 17-year-old Kenneth McBride, are looking for a quiet spot to study at Braemar Hills, one of Hong Kong's quieter nature parks.
They seemed very close, so they obviously knew each other quite well through school. And it seemed to be a very, very strong relationship, and may well have been one of those which lasted from school all the way through.
But that future is about to be cut tragically short. Nicola and Kenneth never return home that night. Their brutally beaten bodies are found by a passing jogger on the hillside the next morning.
It was an extremely violent attack. There was a huge amount of injuries on both Nicola and Kenneth. It was pretty horrific.
Nicola's body was found partially naked with a broken jaw and over 500 stab wounds. The autopsy would later reveal that she had been raped. Kenneth was found bound, badly beaten and strangled, plus his shoes were missing. The ferocity of this attack shocked Hong Kong. The expat community had never encountered anything like this, and students at Kenneth and Nicola's school were in disbelief. They had been popular kids. How could anybody do something so evil?
We did discuss whether perhaps what we were doing was morally wrong.
Random killing of civilians.
People did it in name of the emperor.
Is this something you'd sell?
We're always looking for something different, something eccentric.
Immediate and unconditional surrender.
I think people just fell in love with him so deep.
So, how much you want for it?
Is this really LeBron James's mouthpiece?
That is really, really cool.
I think it's priceless.
This is Vegas. I might hit a jackpot.
Oh, it's going to be fun.
I'm a huge fan. Yeah, brother. I would have killed for this thing when I was 16 years old.
What's in the box?
We got it!
You buy return merchandise
And then resell it for a profit.
You never know what you're going to get in a box. It makes it exciting.
And it's brand new.
Sometimes you get a box for $200
And make $5 grand.
Oh, there's a giant rip in it. I'm scared we're gonna be losing money.
We got bamboozled on this thing.
Nothing's junk.
Big building, big stuff. Big man stuff.
Make me proud.
I've got to try to buy this.
Can we look around?
Absolutely.
20 years of my negotiating skills to try to get the job done.
Oh, my God. Oh, boy.
It's just the kind of place me and Frankie like. That's what I'm talking about, that signature piece. This is going to be an awesome pick.
130. 125.
130.
130.
Two British students have been brutally murdered in Hong Kong's Braemar Hills. Police find Nicola Myers and Kenneth McBride's schoolbooks scattered across the hillside, but initial investigations reveal little else, and the motive for the murder remains unclear. Piecing together what happened will be a monumental task.
We eventually used almost 400 men to comb the area. It's quite a difficult area to comb. It's a hillside, country park, not too many pathways. It was almost a linked arm, hand-in-hand sort of search so that every possible inch was covered, and that took 3 or 4 days.
It was one of the largest and most intensive manhunts in Hong Kong's history, but its sheer scale and widespread media coverage very quickly fanned resentment amongst the locals.
There was extreme levels of shock, and then the shock turned because a lot of particularly the Chinese media, started saying, oh, the only reason the police are so interested in this is precisely because these are 2 white kids. Would the same level of attention be paid if these were 2 Chinese kids being murdered? I think the truth is, probably not.
3 tree branches believed to be the murder weapons were found on Braemar Hills. One of them even had a partial fingerprint. Together with the blood and semen that Hong Kong police had recovered from Nicola's body, they had some good leads for the investigation. However, DNA analysis wasn't introduced into Hong Kong until the early 90s, meaning that all of this evidence was useless. But the police did know one thing for certain, and that was that Kenneth had put up a fight during the attack, and this itself shed some light on his assailants.
From the injuries that was discovered, there was a lot of defensive type wounds on there, so they'd obviously put up quite a big struggle, so there had to be more than 2, let's say, culprits.
But the double murder investigation has so far yielded little information about who they might be.
Not one person heard, saw, or had any idea how or when this did happen, so very, very difficult. We didn't have eyewitnesses, we didn't have any sort of physical evidence per se.
But then there's a surprising development. An anonymous businessman donates $500,000 Hong Kong dollars to anyone that can provide information to the police to help catch the killers.
This, of course, was a huge sum of money in those days, and we started to get all sorts of information coming in as a result of that reward.
6 months after the murders, police finally received the tip-off that unlocks the case, albeit from an unlikely source. The informant is a known figure in Hong Kong's underworld. Triad gangster Fuk Yi Hing reveals to detectives that he overheard one of his foot soldiers, 24-year-old Peng Shunyi, confess to killing Nicola and Kenneth. The Triads are the world's largest criminal organization, known for their secrecy, loyalty, and harsh punishments dished out to anyone breaking their oaths. In other words, if you go up against them, you need to be prepared to handle the consequences. Yet here was a gang member risking his life for $500,000 Hong Kong dollars. Yes, it was the largest reward ever offered in Hong Kong homicide history. But if this was truly a case of greed, was it really worth it? The police arrest Triad member Peng Shunyi. After a series of interrogations, he confesses to the murders and gives police the names of his 4 accomplices: Tam Zefun, Chiu Waiman, Cheng Yaoheng, and Wan Sam Lung. But despite the brutality of the murders, Peng and his accomplices aren't the hardened killers everyone imagined. The youngest of them, Wan Sam Lung, is just 16 years old.
No, they weren't career criminals. They were just young. Let's say young kids. 2 of them were very young, but their criminality, they extended to just petty crime.
The question on everybody's lips was, how could anybody have attacked these kids so sadistically and so viciously? Nicola and Kenneth were just 2 students looking for a quiet place to study. Was this simply a case of being at the wrong place at the wrong time? Police then discover a damning piece of evidence in 20-year-old Tam Zefun's apartment: a pair of Nike sneakers. The same shoes Kenneth wore the day he was murdered. Over the next few months, a chilling picture emerges about what happened on April 20th, 1985. That Saturday afternoon, the gang are roaming the streets looking for ways to make a quick buck for a night out. 24-year-old Peng Chunyi leads them to Braemar Hills.
And then walking along there, they noticed the couple sitting there studying, and that's when they made the decision to try and rob them.
The gang splits up and corners the couple.
Unfortunately for Nicola and Kenneth, they only had $1 on them, and they told them they had no money and tried to sort of defend themselves, in fact. But the gang didn't believe them, and anyway, this became a frenzied attack.
While the rest violently beat Kenneth, leader Peng turns to Nicola and rapes her. Medical reports later indicate the attack lasted for hours. Peng then instructs the group to kill the couple so no one can identify them. They strangle Kenneth with a branch. Nicola dies an hour after Kenneth of a brain hemorrhage and multiple wounds on her body. Before the gang leave, they take Kenneth's Nike shoes and scatter the couple's books along the hillside in an attempt to destroy the evidence. There was something about these murders that was just so wasteful. There was no reasoning behind it. Perhaps the fear of a death sentence, which was still in place in Hong Kong at the time, led to the decision to murder the victims in order to avoid identification. But that wouldn't explain the brutality of the attack. Even gang violence between triads, which could certainly be vicious but was never this deadly, could compare to this attack. So perhaps it was an attack against expats. Whatever the case may be, it was clear that this was evil at its very worst, doing harm for harm's sake. Or perhaps, even worse, for mild entertainment and bragging rights.
I mean, the fact that one of them hung on to the shoes and didn't discard them, and in fact, I believe boasted about the fact that he had the victim's shoes on, shows an aspect of their thinking.
On January 20th, 1987, after a 56-day hearing and 5-hour deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous guilty verdict. Peng, Tam and Chiu are sentenced to death, but in 1992, when Hong Kong officially abolishes the death sentence, this is commuted to life in prison. As minors, 17-year-old Chong Yao-heng and 16-year-old Wang Samlung are ordered to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure, meaning an indefinite jail sentence. With no clear motive and an unbelievable number of injuries inflicted, the murders of Nicola Myers and Kenneth McBride remain one of the most disturbing in Hong Kong history, and one of the only ones to involve the expat community. But for the parents whose lives are irreparably damaged by the murder of a child, how are they supposed to move on? Incredibly, the parents of Kenneth McBride publicly forgave Wang Samlung, the youngest member of the gang and the only one to admit his guilt, and they even asked for him to be released from prison. After 19 years in jail, 35-year-old Wan is released on September the 28th, 2004.
我曾經為佢哋帶嚟咁大嘅傷害，我知道我呢世都冇法能夠補償，我就係講得對唔住，我好多謝佢哋對我原諒同埋寬恕。
Could it have been the forgiveness of the family that helped to rehabilitate him? Pan Chin-yi and Chiu Wai-man remain in prison to this day, while Tam Zi-fun, the one who stole Kenneth's shoes, died in prison of cancer in 2009. As for the fifth member of the gang, 36-year-old Chung Yao-heng, he was eventually released, and today both he and Wan are said to be starting new lives, while the people that knew Kenneth and Nicola are still trying to move on with theirs.
I mean, there's always a sense of closure in terms of, you know, that the culprits have been found and they're being punished, but there was never a sense that, you know, that ended it. I mean, people still missed Kenneth and Nicola terribly and still wanted to remember their lives.
Bombing again and again. Tokyo was burned out.
Literally destroyed the eastern half of the city.
The earthquake did very big shock to Japanese society.
Putting on the Olympic Games motivated the Japanese.
Everybody was really excited about re-entering the global scene.
Japan has bounced back and bounced back even stronger.
What's in the box?
We got it!
You buy return merchandise
and then resell it for a profit. You never know what you're going to get in a box. It makes it exciting.
And it's brand new.
Sometimes you get a box for $200
and make $5 grand.
Oh, there's a giant rip in it. I'm scared we're going to be losing money.
We got bamboozled on this thing.
We tend to think that everything in the world is pretty much known. It isn't true. Are there such things as deadly forests?
100 bodies a year are found in that place.
Bizarre creatures.
There has been thousands of sightings of chupacabras.
Haunted houses.
Do you think what's in that house is evil?
The answers are frightening.
We did discuss whether perhaps what we were doing was morally wrong.
Random killing of civilians.
People did it in name of the emperor.
Is this something you'd sell?
We're always looking for something different, something eccentric. Immediate and unconditional surrender.
I think people just fell in love with him so deep.
In this next case, we look at how one family's celebration turns to grief in just minutes in what remains one of Malaysia's most baffling murder cases. In 2003, 28-year-old Kenny Ong, a successful IT analyst based out of San Diego, California, returns to Kuala Lumpur to be with her sick father. He's just been diagnosed with cancer.
He said, Mommy, Daddy had rare cancer. I must come back, I must come back.
Kenny spends her time caring for her father. Only after his successful surgery does she decide to return home to the United States. On the eve of her departure, Kenny, her mother and her friends are at an upmarket Bangsar shopping centre in Kuala Lumpur for Kenny's farewell dinner. Little do they know that this will be the last time they ever see Kenny alive.
When we saw Kenny, I knew that she was at the prime of her life because I've never seen her so happy and so confident and so contented with her life.
At around 10 p.m., Kenny notices her mother is getting tired and suggests for her mother to go home.
Kenny said, okay, why don't you wait? You just wait right here, Noreen, and I'm going to send my mom to the car, and then I'm going to come back again, and then, you know, we'll hang out for a little bit, and then I'll jump in your car, and then we can go and meet some of our other friends.
As Kenny, her mother and her sister Elsie queue to pay for the parking, Kenny remembers that she left the ticket in the car.
So she asked me to wait there. And before I can say anything, she ran off already. I couldn't follow her because my feet were hurting me.
After 20 minutes, Kenny hasn't returned. Pearlie calls Kenny on her mobile.
It kept on going to the voice box. Suddenly I became panicky already.
Pearlie and her daughter Elsie rush to the underground car park. To their horror, the car, a Proton Tiara, has vanished. And so has Kenny.
When I called her again, then it rang and then the phone got switched off. So that was already like alarm bells going off in my head at that time.
Noticing CCTV cameras in the parking lot, Pearlie rushes to the security guards for help.
We told them that the guy has disappeared. Kenny has disappeared. So he said, can we look at the CCTV? But the guard told us, oh, you have to wait until after midnight.
While they wait, Pearlie reports Kenny's disappearance to the police. By this time, it's past midnight, 2 hours since Kenny had vanished. Finally, they return to the car park to view the security footage. CCTV captures a Proton Tiara speeding through the car park and smashing the entry barrier. There appear to be two people inside the car, a man and a woman.
When I saw the car being driven through the parking barrier, it was like, you know, all the worst fears was like starting to come true. And at the same time, I just couldn't believe that that was happening.
Just imagine what must have been going through Pearlie's mind at that moment, knowing that if only she'd gone with her daughter, that perhaps she could have prevented her abduction. But the real question here was, how could this have happened in the first place? This was an upscale neighborhood mall and there were security cameras everywhere. Plus, how had the security guards failed to see a car smashing through the security barrier just 2 hours earlier? And if they'd allowed Pearlie to look at the CCTV footage just a little bit earlier, maybe things could have turned out differently. 3 days after Kenny's disappearance, police make a discovery a few kilometers from the shopping mall. Pearlie's missing car, the Proton Tiara. The front right tire is punctured and there is blood on the back seat, but Kenny is nowhere to be found. A day later, a construction worker discovers charred remains inside a manhole, close to where Pearlie's Proton was found. He immediately calls the police.
Saya dapati ada macam bau getah terbakar. Saya pergi intai, tengok macam ada rangka manusia.
2 tires filled with cement are partially concealing a body that has been burnt beyond recognition.
Keadaan mangsa atau mayat ketika itu dari paras pinggang ke bawah hancur. Saya rasa pelik kenapa ada ikatan atas kedua-dua tangan.
Within the hour, journalists are jostling at the crime scene. Photos of the charred human remains flood the front covers of Malaysian newspapers.
I just happened to glance at the Chinese newspaper. And I saw them carrying Kenny, and I knew it was Kenny already. But I didn't tell anyone. I could see her hair.
Kenny's mother only found out about her gruesome death through the media. It was something that was preventable and that really shouldn't have happened. There was a real lack of media ethics involved here. Dental records and DNA results confirm the body belongs to Kenny Ong. Forensic analysis also reveals that she had been raped. There was an immediate outpouring of grief and sympathy across Malaysia. This case had all the elements of a newsworthy story. A young, beautiful, successful woman whose life was brutally cut short. But there was something else that captured the public's attention. There had been no warning signs, nothing that set Kenny up as a victim. She'd just gone to dinner in an affluent part of the city and then gone to the car park alone. Any one of us could have found ourselves in a similar situation. It raised serious concerns about public security in Malaysia, especially for women.
Actually, the public, they were very supportive. Many of them wrote to me. They wanted to talk to me, but at the time, I didn't want to talk to anyone. I just wanted to be alone.
工程是一个抽象的概念。
这种新冠的病人明显不一样。
We did discuss whether perhaps what we were doing was morally wrong.
Random killing of civilians.
People did it in name of the emperor.
Is this something you'd sell?
We're always looking for something different, something eccentric. Immediate and unconditional surrender.
I think people just fell in love with him so deep.
If you don't approach the ranch with a degree of reverence, bad things happen.
We've verified and documented some of the most disturbing, unexplained events on this property.
It's just a place, right?
My hope is to get some answers.
When we bring new people onto the ranch behaves differently than it normally does.
There it is again. This is the most unique science project of its kind.
There's things that go on that ranch that I cannot get my head around.
The Pepsi challenge was like a bomb going on.
They're all mobilized to support the war effort.
Hitler became dependent.
This is just the start of what could be a long pattern of destruction.
Humans didn't do this.
Bombing again and again. Tokyo was burned out.
Literally destroyed the eastern half of the city. The earthquake hit.
Very big shock to Japanese society.
Putting on the Olympic Games motivated the Japanese.
Everybody was really excited about re-entering the global scene.
Japan has bounced back and bounced back even stronger.
"28-year-old Malaysian Canny Ong has been found raped and murdered on the outskirts of Kuala Lumpur. Police have few leads to her killer until undercover policeman Corporal Ravi Chandran comes forward to reveal that he has information about the case. On the night Canny disappeared, at around midnight, he was on duty in a high-crime area in Kuala Lumpur.
Masa itu saya bersama Korporal buat rondan di kawasan perindustrian. Sebelum kami masuk ke kawasan perindustrian itu, kami nampaklah sebuah kereta parking di tepi jalan.
Suspicious, Ravi Chandran investigates.
Waktu dalam kereta tu, saya nampaklah satu lelaki Melayu dengan satu Cina lah. So, saya tanya pada pemandu kereta tu, "Cik buat apa?" So, dia bagi tahu lah, "Tak ada apa cik, ni girlfriend saya. Ada masalah lah. Masalah family kan, nak bincang."
Unconvinced, Ravi Chandran asked to see the couple's identity cards. The driver is listed as Ahmad Najib bin Aris, and his passenger is Ong Lei Kian, Canny. As he continues to question the driver, Ravi Chandran notices that the woman is making signs of distress.
Dia menyembah macam itulah, minta tolong kan. Bila Najib tolak kat dia, dia diam. Jadi bila suspek macam tu, saya pun dah mula dah suspek kan.
So Ravi Chandran asked Canny to step out of the car.
Najib pun tutup tingkap lah kan. Bila tutup tingkap, saya tahu dia nak lari. Saya tembaklah dia dah tembakan depan tu, depan tayar tu kan. Tapi dia lari juga kan. Dia pecut kan. Dia pecut, lepas tu saya pun start motor kejar kan. Dia bawa laju lah kan. Lagipun dia bawa pun macam orang gila bawa kan. Orang takut kan. Dia bawa laju, saya pun kejar-kejar lah, tak dapat kan.
It's easy for anyone hearing these accounts to think that more could have been done to help Canny. Questions on the public's mind at the time were, how did the police lose the car, as there would have been very little traffic on the road at that time of night? In fact, why hadn't they radioed in the chase? And if the policeman had done an immediate check on the ID cards, perhaps he could have made a connection that Canny had been the victim of an abduction. A manhunt is now underway for the man last seen with Canny Ong.
Usaha-usaha untuk mencari sasaran gagal pada mulanya kerana ia telah memberi alamat yang tidak betul. Ini orang yang berbahaya yang boleh mengelakkan diri daripada dikesal oleh polis.
Investigators soon learn that Najib has left a trail of false employment records too. But they eventually discover that the real Najib is married and works as an aircraft cabin cleaner. They stake out his last known place of residence. But there is no sign of him for the next 3 days. So unless you've got something to hide or perhaps a criminal past, there's very little need to falsify documents. Yet here was Najib, a blue-collar worker who worked as an air cabin cleaner who had a history of falsifying documents. Could it be that he had somehow masterminded this plan long in advance? Najib's run from the law ends on June 20th, 2003. 7 days after Canny's murder, police arrest him outside of his home.